All right, our speaker for today is somebody who we know well, and we always look forward to his messages because they're insightful and humorous at the same time. Kevin Hauber, come on up, Kevin.
Thank you, Brian. Great stuff, Steve. That's awesome. I figured that was a folk song from, 40 years ago kind of thing. And it was like, no, that's you. And you just wrote that?
Oh, several years ago, actually.
Yeah, beautiful. Congratulations. Okay, title for the lesson today, How to Survive a Hurricane. Now, on a day like today, that may not necessarily be what you're thinking about, but if you remember back a few weeks, there were calamities. We could say how to survive a hurricane or how to survive a flood, which is more what we were getting here a few weeks ago, and who knows about later this week when the next set of rains come, or, with what's been in the news, maybe how to survive an earthquake. All things to be aware of. But the bigger picture of that, I think, that I want to discuss is how to survive when there's so much energy going on, when there's so much being released that you don't know what to do. Ever had one of those periods in your life? May have been a literal hurricane, may have been a literal earthquake, who knows? But there's just so much going on at once. What do we do with that? And it's probably a good time to think about that, like now, when things are calmer, where we can actually start to work with that and not have the fear that's going on in the moment. One of the most basic instincts that we have as human beings, and I love being here in the light. This feels so, we could all, do you all want to come right here and just kind of absorb this? This is really good. One of the most basic instincts that we have is to shelter ourselves from the storms of life, from the things, the waves as they come through, the literal and figurative waves of things coming through. Now, there's lots of early training and early input that we get around that, and it's reinforced frequently, and dare say through the media on a daily basis. Now, we also have lots of genetic and epigenetic programming around that. Now, our planet has gone through many periods of instability, and that has led to sweeping changes over the eons, things that we can't even imagine, the literal rise and fall of species and entire epochs that come and go. I was reading a National Geographic article not long ago about an asteroid that hit by the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago. The asteroid was the size of a mountain, and it created such an event that it created a tidal wave that went all the way to the Dakotas, if you can imagine that. Remember the stories about extinction of the dinosaurs? That was the event, and they found in the layers of sediment when they were excavating dinosaur bones, they found the dust from the meteor, because meteor dust, rock from outer space, is different than rock from the earth. And they found that was cataclysmic kinds of change. Can you imagine something of that scale? So we try and build our buildings to withstand earthquakes, and our cars are made to be crash-worthy for when something happens, and our computers are all backed up to the cloud, right? Or something. And collectively, we spend a lot of time guarding against disaster. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed how much time we spend in that protective guarding against disaster mode? Now, if you don't believe me, then just look at all of the different kinds of insurance that you have. Now, insurance is supposed to protect us from something bad going on and, somehow make us whole again. Now, I recently had to renew my insurance license and go through a lot of training in the process. So it made me really aware of that. And it was all of these layers of stuff that we try and protect against. And it starts with life insurance that is supposed to make it all better when we leave the planet. Now, to me, there's a good luck element in that. It may make things a little better financially for those who survive us, but when we're gone, we're gone. And then there's insurance in case you die too soon, or insurance in case you live too long. Now, where is the divine actuarial table that says what's exactly right in that, not dying too soon, not living too long, just right, somewhere in there. And then there's car insurance that we're required to have if we're going to drive. Now, it's probably one of our biggest day in and day out kinds of hazards that we face, right? And we have to keep car insurance. It's required by law. And then there's homeowners insurance that you have if you own a home. And if you don't own a home, then you're supposed to have renter's insurance. And then there's unemployment insurance that you have to pay if you work. Think of the irony in that. And there's disability insurance that you pay if you're able-bodied. Think of the irony once again. And then, of course, there's medical insurance that's supposed to cover medical costs if we get sick, and I'm sure we all have stories about that kind of situation and whether that coverage works or not. Now, all told, we spend a substantial amount of time and energy and income trying to cover the eventualities of what might happen if something goes bad. That is a very defensive and expensive way to live, isn't it? So just kind of consider that. So because of the way our society is structured, we have to navigate a lot of those realities. We don't have any choice if we're going to drive and so on and so forth. We have to do that. We try to guard against the hazards of life individually and collectively. So, one of the responses to that was back in the 30s, the hazards of life were showing up big time in the Depression, so Social Security was created. And now we just accept that as a norm. But 100 years ago, that didn't exist. So trying to guard against these kinds of realities. But what happens when something really goes wrong? Not necessarily the meteor striking, but when something big happens, like the earthquake, or like the war, or like the pandemic. What happens then? Well, if you notice, your insurance excludes acts of God and war and a number of other things. So all of these things that we try and guard against are for the little stuff, really. The big stuff still is on us to adapt to and to figure out how to work with that act of God. Most of the time, insurance just won't cover that. So that's one side of the discussion. Why do we put so much of our energy and in turn our money toward guarding against negative outcomes? What does our new thought teaching tell us about where we put our attention? And of course, we know that what we focus on expands. So if we focus on the risks and the dangers, they are going to expand for us. That's true from the kinds of food we eat, the relationships that we have, most basic ways that we cultivate our lives. If we fear something enough, we call it into being. So we have to be very conscious about that and still take care of what we need to navigate in the world. It feels like a double-edged sword, doesn't it? That how do I navigate the day-to-day realities and really requirements that I have and still keep the focus on what I really want to have happen in life and what I really want to experience. I heard a report once that described how to survive a hurricane. I found this to be a really curious thing. I want to share it with you, and here's how it went. So that most people think that boarding up a building you're in and closing out the storm is the best way to survive. And up to a certain point, that's true. You see, the old thing about close the storm shutters and bar the door and all that kind of stuff. Only now we have buildings that have fake storm shutters and things, so it doesn't quite work the same. But anyway, when the really big stuff comes along, though, like the Katrina type hurricanes with 140 mile an hour winds, it's a different story. We need to do something different. The idea then is that you open the doors and windows at the front and the back of the house and you let everything blow through. Crazy, right? You think I've lost it saying that. So why on earth would you do that? And it's very simple physics, because if you're closing everything off, there's more pressure against the building and it will topple over sooner. But if you let everything blow through, there's a better chance that the building will survive. This goes beyond the what we resist persists idea that we talk about in New Thought, and gets into, if we resist strongly enough, our resistance can become our undoing. Have you ever had that happen, where you resisted something so strongly that it turned into a negative outcome just in itself? But then my mind flashes to, hey, what about all that neat, orderly stuff that's inside that I've spent lots of time organizing how my life needs to be? That occupies an inordinate amount of time. In fact, I would say that I have a lot of my identity, that's wrapped up in how have I organized the inside of my life. Anybody else in that boat? But the winds and the hurricane don't care, do they? So at some point we have to ask, is it better to lose everything that's inside and start over again, or be wiped out completely and lose the house too? Can you see where I'm going with this? Yeah? The house, of course, is our consciousness. And the contents are our thoughts and our feelings, and our judgments, and what we identify with. And the last time I was here, we talked about what we identify with. That was that material from Richard Rohr that was really, really wonderful about that. And how what we identify with needs to progress over our lifetime and over many lifetimes. So here's an example of something that can force us to change what we identify with in our lifetime. So what happens when the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the floods and whatever else it is come along? Most of the time, we brace against those kinds of events and ride through them. Now, we've talked in the past about riding the waves, kind of the surfer's approach to life, riding through the waves that we have instead of fighting them. Because fighting the waves of whatever's going on is exhausting, isn't it? And if we can learn to flow with it and ride it, it's a good thing. But sooner or later, the big one comes along that has the time to start over energy to it. Do you know that one? Have you ever had the time to start over moments in life? And how have you experienced those moments of the hurricanes for yourself and others around you? It can show up as a health crisis. Someone can leave. Someone might die. Or the money might run out, or the business goes south. Or there can be a fire, or a flood, or an earthquake, or a literal hurricane, or even a pandemic. Have you noticed how much things have changed for us here just since the pandemic? We weren't doing this beforehand. We didn't know how to change in that way. But when we had to change, we changed. We came up with a new way of being together. And fortunately, it's both live and virtual. So, we can be here and we can have people far flung joining us. We didn't know that a few years ago. But we had to change because that hurricane, that pandemic, came through and forced us to change. Now, these kinds of events, they can shake us to our foundations. They force us to recreate our lives in a new image and a new order. And it asks us to show up differently. Now, I'm sure, everyone in the room has examples of that in life, probably many examples of those kinds of situations in life. Now, we tend to think of having these events come along as a bad thing. But if you look at the philosophies and the history in South Asia, the Hindu traditions speak of God as a three-part entity: God as creator, God as preserver, and God as destroyer. Now, for our culture, we tend to focus on the God as creator, God as preserver part, and the God as destroyer, not so much. That's the one in Western theology that usually gets more ascribed to the devil. But is it really? Is it evil afoot, or is it our inability to deal with impermanence? Ooh. Yeah, because so many times God as destroyer is more rearranger, recycler. Things change. Life brings the unexpected. The cosmic Etch-a-Sketch gets shaken hard from time to time and erases everything. You remember those as a kid when we had Etch-a-Sketches? Those were so great. And we'd create this whole thing and then shake it really hard, and it would all go away and we'd just start all over again, which I always thought was kind of fun. But when that happens in life, when the cosmic Etch-a-Sketch is shaken really hard, it doesn't feel so good, does it? Yeah. Just ask the dinosaurs, if you could. They got their cosmic Etch-a-Sketch in a big way. We get to choose how we will work with that shaking that's going on, whatever form it shows up in. That's a challenge that we can take up and know that there's more than just something negative and destructive going on in a time of crisis. There is a recreation that is going on. The mythologies that we have around the phoenix get into that. Burning to ashes and then rising again. That is part of our mythology. There is change at work in our lives all the time. And sometimes that change is like a hurricane that reorders everything. How do we respond to that? How do we choose to respond to that? Our job is to be open enough to let that change blow through and avoid getting stuck in resistance, so that when everything is said and done, we're still standing. And we can adapt to whatever it is that's coming along. And then we get to hang out in the void while something new generates. Now that's a whole nother talk in itself, isn't it? the what it takes to hang out in the void. Remember what Sadie used to say about that? That when one door closes, another opens, but the hallways between are a bitch. What a great challenge. And so hard. So have you experienced that dynamic of God as creator, God as preserver, God as destroyer in your life? Have you noticed that? It says a lot about how divine will is so far beyond our human comprehension. And we just have to work with acceptance. And so how do we make space for the hurricanes to blow through and recognize that everything is the way that it needs to be within that moment, and find the opportunity to be able to create something new. We have to develop those practices that open the doors and the windows and allow that free flow through. Have you ever been in a building, in a house that's been closed up for a long time, and you open the doors and the windows and it's like, oh, wow, that's so much better. Well, why not practice that on a day like today? Why not practice that when we're not under stress and be able to just let things blow through and reorder as needed? We have to know that God mind probably has a better idea for us than what our own individual mind can conceive of. Chances that might be a hard one to accept at the ego level, but God mind probably has a better idea. Maybe with enough practice, we can release and release again and release again, coming into the present moment. So here's the summary for the lesson today. Hurricanes come into our lives from time to time in many forms. To survive the strongest of these forces, we have to open up and be willing to let the insides and the outsides of our lives be transformed, perhaps in ways that our egos don't like. And we need to make practice of making space in our hearts and our minds to allow for change and for growth. If we can do that, life offers us amazing opportunities. So thank you, bless you, namaste.